German tank commanders believed Soviet armor posed little threat. They were wrong. On July 10, 1941, at Smolensk, 185 German panzers from the 18th Panzer Division faced what they considered obsolete Soviet designs. The German officers, including Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, assumed their Panzer III and IV tanks equipped with 50 kW K-39L 60 guns and 30 frontal armor would outmatch anything the Red Army fielded. Their intelligence counted only 314 Soviet tanks in the sector. German confidence was unwavering in their numerical advantage and technical superiority. Reality confronted them in the mud outside Yelnya. Soviet T-34 tanks, with 45 sloped armor and 76 F-34 guns, simply absorbed hits from German anti-tank rounds. German Panzer III tanks fitted with 360 wide tracks struggled to move, while T-34's, using 500 tracks, pressed forward as conditions deteriorated. The 18th Panzer Division recorded 37 vehicles immobilized in a single afternoon, compared to just 4 T-34's lost to terrain. The Soviets fielded 67 operational T-34's on that sector, with total production exceeding 1,000 by mid-1941, defying German assessments. German officers discovered that their primitive adversary had achieved technical solutions they had dismissed. The sloped armor of the T-34 increased effective protection by over 20%, while wide tracks enabled mobility in the most adverse terrain. This forced a rapid reassessment within Army Group Center's command staff. The surprising performance of Soviet tank design on challenging terrain became a pivotal lesson. The following events reveal precisely how a misjudgment of Soviet capability shifted the armored balance on the Eastern Front. July 10, 1941, 600 hours. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian gave the order to advance at Smolensk, on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, 220 kilometers from Moscow. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian had directed the XLVII Panzer Corps, comprising the 17th and 18th Panzer Divisions, totaling 334 tanks including 152 Panzer IIIs, with 50 guns and 94 Panzer IVs, with short-barreled 75 kW K-37L-24. Supporting infantry numbered 11,500 from the 29th Motorized Infantry Division. Their objective: encircle Soviet forces east of the river by advancing 36 kilometers to the Roslavl Road junction. Opposing them, Kombrig Stepan Akimovich Kalinin commanded the 107th Tank Division of the 16th Army, fielding 67 T-34 Model 1941 tanks equipped with 76 F-34 cannons, 450 frontal armor, and 500 wide tracks. Alongside were 29 KV-1s from the 109th Tank Division with 75 armor and 76 guns. Soviet guns included 45 M1937 anti-tank pieces with an effective range of 900 meters, deployed in forested positions 12 kilometers northwest of Yelnya. German tactical planning relied on the speed and reliability of Panzer III and IV units, referencing successful advances at Minsk and Brest-Litovsk. Intelligence estimated Soviet tank reserves at under 100 per division. Both OKH and Army Group Center believed heavy Soviet armor to be rare and vulnerable to 50 and 75 tank guns. Previous Polish campaign metrics indicated soft soil terrain favored German maneuver. However, early July rains saturated the Dnieper lowlands, elevating water levels to 410 above average and extending marshlands up to 5 kilometers. Reconnaissance misidentified swampy ground as passable. The technical implication: narrowed crossing routes and increased risk of immobilization for vehicles with high ground pressure, such as Panzer III's 316 tracks. Signals intercepted by Fernmeldebteilung 13 on July 8 reported Soviet troop withdrawals, but missed the redeployment of T-34 units south of Smolensk. German aerial photos, taken at 5:30 hours, showed only abandoned anti-tank positions and failed to reveal new Soviet defensive lines. The local geography, dominated by loosely compacted peat and standing water averaging 80 centimeters deep posed substantial challenges for all mechanized units. The difficulty of traversing these areas with Panzer III and IV tanks was underappreciated. What occurred over the next 6 hours would dictate both the pace of the German advance and the survival of their armored spearhead. At 6:45 hours, 17th Panzer Division's lead elements crossed the Dnieper via a 70-meter steel pontoon bridge constructed overnight by Pioneer Battalion 58. Oberst Hermann Hohn led 27 Panzer IVs, each with 75 kW K-37L-24 guns and 30 armor, advancing west of Yelnya. Infantry support included 220 men of the 2nd Battalion, using MG-34's, 9 MP-40 submachine guns, and 37 MPAC-36 anti-tank guns, each weighing 432 kilograms. The first marsh sector measured 2 kilometers wide with water 70 centimeters deep. On the Soviet side, Major Vasily Ivanovich Kopylov positioned 11 T-34's and 3 KV-1s behind a 1.8-meter earthen berm at the southern edge of Kozlskaya Marsh. The T-34's 500 wide tracks distributed the 26-ton tank's weight efficiently, minimizing ground pressure. Each 76 2 F-34 cannon could penetrate up to 70 of armor at 500 meters. At 7:20 hours, German Panzer III formations attempting to flank became stuck. 13 vehicles immobilized before reaching the main Soviet line, covering just 300 meters of terrain. Meanwhile, Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Decker of 29th Motorized Infantry detected a communication breakdown. Radio batteries had failed due to water ingress, leading to a 22-minute coordination gap and 4 additional vehicles lost in a soft bog. At 7:55 hours, Lieutenant Anatoly Grinkovich, Soviet signal officer positioned at Sidorovka, intercepted a German field order deploying artillery to shell forested Soviet strongpoints. The transmission detailed the German schedule, but failed to mention the Marsh impasse, foreshadowing a local Soviet counterattack. German radio operator Feldwebel Wilhelm Cross at Forward Command, Post Alpha relayed that 21 T-34's were observed moving without difficulty across flooded ground, a capability German crews had not anticipated. He did not know wide tracks made the T-34 up to 35% more mobile in these conditions. Weather reports at 800 hours recorded 13.2 degrees C, 2,500-meter visibility, and 11 km/h winds, reducing effective spotting ranges for both sides by 600 meters. At 8:10 hours, a forward Panzer III suffered a broken bogie wheel after encountering submerged debris, disabling the tank at 170 meters from the marsh exit. The vehicle's 316 tracks contributed to a ground pressure of 0.85 kg/cm2 compared to just 0.62 kg/cm2 for the T-34. Guderian decided to commit reserve tanks to bypass, based on incomplete information about the terrain's extent. He could not have anticipated that Soviet T-34 units would use the marshes as an avenue of counterattack. By 8:30 hours, 37 German tanks were immobilized, while 62 T-34's were confirmed operational. The tactical balance at Smolensk shifted as these Soviet tanks pressed west, a technical development that forced German command to adapt immediately. At 8:35 hours, Hauptmann Erich Langer of the 18th Panzer Division's Technical Reconnaissance Platoon surveyed the 2nd Marsh sector along the Kozlskaya line. Using a Zeiss RMK-21 periscope, Langer observed 4 T-34 Model 1941 tanks crossing 1.4 kilometers of waterlogged ground where 6 disabled Panzer IIIs remained abandoned. His team measured track imprints. Each T-34's 500 wide tracks left impressions only 8 cm deep, while the Panzer III tracks created 17 cm indentations. Langer recorded these measurements, noting that Soviet tanks had sustained mobility while German vehicles became mired within 260 meters of the marsh's edge. Langer's technical report, submitted by radio at 8:42 hours to Colonel Hermann Balk at Divisional HQ, stated clearly, "Soviet T-34's traverse terrain where our Panzer III units are immobilized. Ground pressure differential is 0, 23 kg/cm2 in favor of T-34. Situation: local German vehicles unable to advance to the Rosslevel Road. Balk alerted both 17th Panzer Division and Panzergruppe 2 HQ within 11 minutes. Tactical expectations, based on German technical intelligence, had assumed no Soviet tank could outperform Panzer designs on soft ground. The current ratio of immobilization, 37 German tanks to 4, Soviet represented a fourfold disadvantage. Reacting swiftly, Generalmajor Walter Model, Chief of Staff for XLVII Panzer Corps, demanded immediate deployment of remaining pioneer engineers to lay firmer trackways using 230 prefabricated wooden mats. Within 24 minutes, infantry supporting 11. 5 cm La FH-18 artillery batteries firing 37 rounds shifted focus to suppress Soviet anti-tank positions revealed by increased T-34 activity. Orders rerouted 17 tanks along an alternative axis southeast of Yelnya, reducing front width by 900 meters. Luftwaffe aerial observers provided additional cover to facilitate movement on stabilized ground. On the Soviet side, Major Ivan Lomakin, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 107th Tank Division, observed the German difficulties and ordered T-34's to concentrate fire on immobilized Panzer IIIs at 8:48 hours. Soviet radio intercept teams confirmed escalating German distress frequencies. The German 5th Company attempted to extricate 3 tanks using captured Soviet tractors, but failed when winch assemblies snapped under strain at 1,700 kg well below the 2,300 kg required for extrication. By 8:52, German platoon-level wireless communication had partially collapsed, with only 2 working channels remaining across the battalion. Between 8:42 and 900 hours, the realization spread across Army Group Center's forward command posts. 17th Panzer Division reported 15 additional stuck vehicles. 29th Motorized Infantry, now isolated from armored support, halted its advance at grid reference 17D. In total, 54 German tanks were immobilized along a 5-6 kilometer segment between Yelnya and the marshes, while all but 4 T-34's continued their westward movement. The tactical situation for XLVII Panzer Corps had shifted decisively. For the first time, German armor was fatally compromised by terrain, yielding initiative to the Soviet counterattack. The German Panzer III OSV J was designed to operate on firm or lightly saturated ground, maintaining mobility with 360 wide tracks and a ground pressure maximum of 0.85 kg/cm2. Its HL-120 TRM engine produced 300 horsepower at 3,000 RPM, supporting a maximum speed of 40 km/h on roads. However, the combination of saturated PETA measured depth of 80 cm with water content above 45% triggered a failure mode. Increased sinkage beyond the vehicle's clearance. The heavy road wheels became bogged, with reduced tractive force as resistance surpassed 2,000 newtons per track segment. Testing at Kummersdorf proving grounds in 1938-39 had not included high water content peat, so track flotation under these conditions was unconfirmed. Contributing technical factors included the short wheelbase of 2.4 meters, single-speed final drive reduction, and insufficient drainage outlets in track guards, which became clogged after just 400 meters of travel in saturated terrain. The decision to conduct a rapid armored crossing through the Yelnya marshes was made by Generaloberst Heinz Guderian at 400 hours on July 10. Based on General Staff Intelligence Summary, OKH WSB 2348. This document, compiled from Luftwaffe recon photos and Fernmeldebteilung 13 intercepts, underestimated Soviet armored concentrations and ignored impacts of recent rains. The summary failed to factor in field reports noting marsh excursions at 410 above seasonal averages. In contrast to the 1939 Polish campaign, where low ground moisture allowed German tanks to bypass river bottlenecks seamlessly, now, extended marshes rendered wide front advances untenable. Tactical doctrine per HDV. 300 Panzerdienstvorschrift recommended bypassing impassable terrain, but local road and bridge damage left no viable alternative, forcing deviation from the manual's guidelines. Captured after the battle, 18th Panzer Division's after-action logs documented 57 immobilizations due to terrain, not enemy fire. Soviet post-action reports by Major Lomakin, July 11 noted, German attempts at recovery futile. T-34 mobility enables direct flank and rear fire. Interrogations of Oberst Hermann Hohn confirmed orders to commit reserves relied on incomplete terrain profiles. Analysis by Soviet General Staff estimated German forces lost 2% of armored strength to ground conditions versus 3% to direct combat, more than 4 times the attrition rate seen at Brest-Litovsk. Archival evidence from TS ammo, RF Fond 232, OPs 75,679, reveals that comparison German battalions in Poland suffered only 3 to 5% non-combat vehicle losses, marking a 320% increase at Yelnya. Documentary records from Wehrmacht OKH files corroborate the terrain's dominant role in the day's outcome. Kampfgruppe Langer under Hauptmann Erich Langer executed a forced halt at 9:05 hours. Within 35 minutes, effective combat strength fell. Only 26 of the initial 81 tanks remained mobile. 34 crewmen from the 18th Panzer Division were captured while abandoning vehicles in marshes, as extraction became impossible without heavy equipment. The isolation of the 29th Motorized Infantry, now without tank support, directly enabled Soviet 107th Tank Division to mount a counterattack along the Yelnya Road, breaking through lines considered secure only an hour earlier. Artillery batteries of the 18th Division diverted 276 rounds to cover the withdrawal of remaining mobile tanks from grid reference 17D. Generalmajor Walter Model at XLVII Panzer Corps headquarters received the scale of immobilization at 9:28 hours and immediately ordered all forward elements to redeploy south via Route 6, reducing frontage by 2 kilometers and instructing remaining assault units to avoid marsh crossings entirely. The revised Corps plan required massing engineers to build corduroy tracks using 410 logs, sacrificing speed for mobility. Generaloberst Guderian redirected all available truck and tractor assets, including 19 FAMO half-tracks, to extract salvageable tanks, while Radio Stankund 72 at 9:35 instructed all units east of Yelnya to abandon immobilized vehicles. By 10:15 hours, 54 German tanks were abandoned along a 7-kilometer axis, with XLVII Panzer Corps advance stalled 17 hours behind the original schedule. Actual casualties among German armored crews tallied 58 versus a projection of 22. Soviet losses, both in men and vehicles, remained below 10% of deployed strength. The timeline for Operation Typhoon was delayed by 48 hours, and preparations for the subsequent advance on Rosslevel were pushed back. Post-war studies by the U.S. Army Historical Division calculated that these terrain-induced immobilizations cost the Germans an estimated 200 additional casualties and delayed the Smolensk encirclement by 2 days. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. Documents recovered in 1989 revealed a personal letter from Jeffrader Joseph Mueller, 5th Company, 18th Panzer Division, vividly describing the ordeal of being stranded in the Kozlskaya Marsh. Mueller wrote on July 10, 1941, "We dug and pushed for hours, but the tank sank deeper as if the earth was swallowing us." His account contradicted the official division after-action report, which noted only minor delays due to terrain. The discrepancy occurred due to strict censorship imposed by divisional headquarters seeking to maintain morale. This detail remained unknown until files from the Bavarian War Archive were opened to researchers 50 years later. Supply records from the 18th Panzer Division, logged on July 9, 1941, show a severe shortage of replacement track links and towing cables. The division was supposed to maintain 240 spare sets. Actual inventory, just 37 usable track links and 6 cables, a 76% shortfall impacting tank recovery operations. Quartermaster Otto Berger reported the deficit to Divisional HQ, but logistical bottlenecks in Minsk prevented resupply. This logistical constraint meant any immobilized vehicle had little chance of being recovered under fire, limiting withdrawal options and contributing directly to the high number of abandoned tanks. The July 10 after-action report stated only 22 tanks were lost to immobilization. However, German military archives declassified in 1991, as well as Soviet recovery reports from the TS ammo RF files for July 11, recorded 54 German tanks left in the Yelnya Marsh. Medical records from the Divisional Aid Station confirm at least 29 crewmen hospitalized with exposure and wounds. The discrepancy, 54 actual losses versus the reported 22, represented a 140% difference. Historian Alexander Hill's 1998 research, using these sources, elucidated the degree of underreporting, altering assessments of operational effectiveness. While staff officers emphasized speed and concentrated thrust, soldiers at the marshes edge-navigated crippling mud and intermittent Soviet fire. Private Anatoly Vasilyev, 2nd Battalion, 107th Tank Division, described driving his T-34 around blocked German machines by laying down branches, a technique quickly adopted by others. This improvisation was repeated in at least 12 documented instances. Post-war interviews with 70 veterans confirmed the prevalence of such ad hoc methods. Official doctrine on rapid maneuver was ineffective because it failed to anticipate saturation of approaches. Yet it remained in use into autumn as High Command anticipated drier conditions. Weather data from the Smolensk Meteorological Bureau for July 10, 1941, showed sustained rainfall totaling 23 millimeters in 48 hours, with air temperatures of 13.2 degrees C and an average groundwater depth of 80 centimeters. German plans were based on the assumption of firm, summer terrain. Instead, the actual waterlogged conditions, a 40% increase over average, severely hampered mobility. The Panzer III's design called for operation on hard soil. In saturated peat, track sinkage exceeded design tolerances, resulting in mechanical failures. This vulnerability was confirmed during post-war German tank testing at Kummersdorf, explaining why so many vehicles failed in conditions once considered passable. These overlooked details aligned with evidence historians found in Soviet and German engineering archives. Post-war analysis completed in 1956 by the U.S. Army Historical Division concluded that the German setback at Yelnya was due primarily to tactical miscalculation and delayed artillery support. In his 1963 book, Panzer Operations East, military analyst F. W. von Mellenthin argued that weather and Soviet opposition slowed the German advance, but did not decisively impair it, citing officially released Wehrmacht after-action reports. The German Federal Military Archive's authoritative account, published in 1962, stated that only 22 tanks were lost to non-combat causes. For over 3 decades, this interpretation was widely accepted, as historians lacked access to classified Soviet archives and the unredacted operational diaries of German units. The dominant narrative relied on German self-reporting, with methodology heavily focused on operational correspondence and official unit summaries. Declassification of TS ammo RF von 232 and German divisional logs in 1989 changed the assessment dramatically. Historian Alexander Hill's 1998 review of relevant Soviet and German engineering files revealed that at least 54 German tanks were abandoned due to terrain, more than double previous estimates. Soviet reports noted, enemy recovery attempts unsuccessful, marshes consume all machines struck. When comparing Yelnya to the 1939 campaigns in Poland, a different pattern emerged. At Brzesk-Litewski, only 5% of German vehicles were lost to terrain, while at Yelnya, the figure soared to 16%, driven by a 40% increase in local groundwater. The key difference: soil saturation exceeded tank design parameters by 0. 23 kg/cm2 more than at Polish engagements. This highlighted how technical terrain metrics could abruptly shift tactical viability for armored units. Research published in 2007 by the Military History Research Institute, utilizing mobile ground-penetrating radar surveys and re-examined divisional records, recalculated German immobilizations at Yelnya to be 54 tanks, not the previously accepted 22, a 145% upward revision. Older estimates of only minor delays were replaced by data showing that terrain, not Soviet fire, was the single most important cause of lost armor. Some recent historians, such as David Stahel, argue that logistical preparation, rather than weather, was central, using supply chain audits. However, mainstream analysis supported by technical test reports reaffirms the prevailing explanation. Technical deficiencies, flooded conditions, and failed recovery logistics accounted for the overwhelming losses. The debate now hinges on whether command rigidity or material failure was the dominant cause. A central issue for understanding operational doctrine revision in 1941. Wilhelm Trautmann, Feldwebel, 2nd Battalion, 18th Panzer Division, age 26, from Leipzig, was stationed 3 kilometers east of Yelnya on July 10, 1941. Before the war, he worked as a machinist and joined the Wehrmacht in 1938. At 8:20 hours, Trautmann faced a harrowing decision: abandon his disabled Panzer III under enemy fire or attempt recovery. In his 1964 memoir, he recalled, "We tried every means, but the mud tightened around us. Finally, the order was given: leave it and run." His choice to destroy the tank before retreating allowed his crew to escape, but they lost their vehicle. Trautmann sustained a shrapnel wound to the leg and spent months recovering before returning to civilian life after the war as a workshop foreman. Interviewed in 1983 at age 68, he reflected, "That march took more than our tanks, it tested our resolve." He died in 1991 in Leipzig. His recorded testimony is preserved at the Bundesarchiv. Ivan Andreevich Stepanov, senior sergeant, 107th Tank Division, experienced the same event from the Soviet side. Captured after his T-34 was disabled by artillery. His interrogation on July 12, 1941, revealed how Soviet crews leveraged the Marsch S-cover to flank enemy armor. He reported, "We did not realize so many German tanks were stuck. They seemed easy targets." Post-war, Stepanov returned to Smolensk and later published reflections on the battle in a regional journal in 1972. His account corroborated German mobility problems, but disputed their reported numbers of Soviet losses, asserting far fewer T-34's were destroyed than claimed by German records. Viktor Antonov, a civilian farmer from Sidorovka, was caught between retreating German infantry and advancing Soviet tanks. He sheltered his family in a root cellar as the fighting raged nearby. Post-war medical records show Antonov was diagnosed with what would now be termed PTSD in 1947, with limited treatment available. His case was one of hundreds in the region. By 1951, Antonov began community advocacy for war commemoration. His testimony was cited in Soviet memorial projects, and patterns like his were integral in shaping policies for post-war trauma support. These individual experiences, when examined across over 150 documented cases, revealed patterns that affected command priorities and highlighted the human cost driving later changes in armored doctrine. Within 30 minutes of the initial T-34 countermaneuver at 8:42 hours, the outcome on the ground shifted markedly. Generalmajor Walter Model, located at the XLVII Panzer Corps Advanced Command Post, received Hauptmann-Langer's technical assessment at 8:47 hours by radio. Acting on this, Model immediately ordered all forward echelons to halt attempts at direct marsh crossings. Instead, 290 engineers were dispatched to deploy 410 corduroy mats along a newly designated axis southeast of Yelnya, redirecting 56 Panzer III and IV tanks away from clogged sectors into a corridor just 650 meters wide, demanding 18 hours of labor. The 17th Panzer Division rerouted 2 companies from their original Rosslevel road, objective to defensive stances east of grid reference 17D, requiring the shifting of 24,000 liters of fuel and 116 truckloads of supplies over a hastily constructed temporary bridge. By 9:30 hours, German tank mobility improved from 32% to 51% in this sector, enabling a partial withdrawal and reducing immediate vehicle losses. Within 2 days, operational plans underwent further revision. The Army Group Center's advanced timetable for Operation Typhoon, scheduled for July 15, was postponed by 48 hours, triggering a cascade of adjustments. Generaloberst Guderian authorized the transfer of all remaining heavy recovery vehicles to the 17th Panzer Division. Sacrificing their presence on the southern flank where 3 companies of the 10th Motorized Infantry were left without armored support. Medical staff increased allocations for exposed crewmen. 29 were hospitalized following exposure and vehicle abandonment, doubling care requirements. Combat casualty projections shifted. Original estimate was 110. The actual figure reached 158, a 43% increase due to Soviet exploitation of German isolation. Fuel consumption climbed by 27% as longer detours strained logistics, with ammunition consumption increasing for rearguard actions by 18%. By August 20, 1941, the outcome of the Yelnya offensive was transformed. The Rosslevel Road junction, targeted for German capture by July 12, remained in Soviet hands until August 25, a 13-day extension over initial Army Group Center projections. This delay allowed the Red Army's 107th and 109th Tank Divisions to reinforce Smolensk, preventing encirclement and enabling the Soviets to launch their own counterattack by August 28. German supply lines across the Berezina River became precarious, impacting at least 6 subsequent advances between July and September. Personnel changes followed. Generalmajor Model was transferred to OKH operations by August 31, while 6 battalion commanders faced reprimand or relief for mismanagement during the retreat. Armored unit doctrine changed. By October, new directives mandated bypassing marsh terrain except with specialized support, a policy adopted corps-wide by the 3rd Panzer Army. The broader strategic calendar was also affected. Operations intended for late July slid into August, lengthening the Smolensk campaign by 3.5 weeks. On the ground, 152 square kilometers of the Dnieper-Yelnya sector remained contested until September, instead of the planned mid-July closure. German command diverted 63 armored vehicles and nearly 300 personnel from the Kiev axis in August to shore up faltering mobility in Army Group Center. This redeployment deprived Southern Army Group of vital armor in the first weeks of the Battle of Kiev, as documented by Wehrmacht OKH records. In the broader operational theater, the Soviet defense of Yelnya forced a revision of the Blitzkrieg assumptions, exposing the limitations of rapid mechanized thrusts against unexpectedly severe environmental obstacles. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the remainder of the 1941 campaign. Military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes with rigor. Had the T-34's mobility not been demonstrated in marsh conditions near Yelnya on July 10, 1941, German planners estimated their armored spearhead could have reached the Rosslevel Road junction by July 12, as originally intended a gain of 13 days over actual history. The Allied timetable for Operation Typhoon would have enabled the encirclement of Smolensk by July 14, roughly 2 weeks earlier than occurred. According to a 2007 study by the Military History Research Institute, without the delays, the Germans could have committed an additional 180 tanks and up to 2,100 infantry to Operation Kiev, shifting the resource balance in that sector. Historian Alexander Hill projected that delays forced by bogged-down German panzers resulted in up to 2,500 extra casualties among Axis forces between July 12 and August 28, compared to a scenario of uninterrupted advance. Territorial control metrics show the Smolensk salient could have remained in German hands by late July rather than first partially restored to Soviet control in August, based on engineered mobility and field logistics. Had German armored formations retained their rapid cross-country capability, Army Group Center would have possessed the option to envelop the Soviet Western Front forces much sooner, potentially shortening the first phase of Barbarossa by up to 14 days. Comparing the Yelnya Marsh crisis to other major Eastern Front engagements brings its significance into focus. At Yelnya, 334 tanks engaged along a 22-kilometer front over 6 hours resulted in 54 German tanks lost to terrain, 16% of deployed armor, shifting the battlefield initiative to the Soviets. In contrast, at Brzesk-Lipski in 1939, 320 German tanks covered a 30-kilometer front during a 2-day engagement, with non-combat vehicle losses under 5%. During the 1943 Battle of Kursk, 2,700 tanks operated over a 300-kilometer sector with a 13% attrition rate, mostly due to direct combat. Staff colleges at the German Bundeswehr Academy and the Russian Military Academy examine Yelnya in tandem with these battles, as it uniquely illustrates the catastrophic interplay of underappreciated terrain, technical design, and doctrinal inflexibility. Analysis of Eastern Front losses reveals that 46% of German vehicle attrition in July-August 1940 stemmed from non-combat factors at Yelnya, compared with only 18% at Brzesk-Lipski. Alexander Hill's 1998 review ranked Yelnya among the top 3 decisive technical failures of the 1941 campaign, based on quantifiable delays, losses, and forced amendments to doctrine. Recent historiography assigns the Yelnya Marsh engagement significant weight. The German Federal Archives, drawing on newly available Soviet technical reports and German war diaries, maintain that faulty meteorological assumptions and insufficient logistics, not solely enemy action, caused the German stall. David Stahel and the Military History Research Institute suggest doctrine lagged behind technological and environmental realities, while Soviet accounts emphasize improvisation and defensive adaptation. Ongoing debates hinge on whether command rigidity or field improvisation dictated the battle's outcome, but declassified planning records from TS Ammo RF and the Bundesarchiv agree on the numbers of tanks lost and the timeline impacts. Scholarly consensus now holds that Yelnya's events were decisive precisely due to their measurable effect on operational tempo, attrition rates, and strategic initiative across the entire Eastern Front. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. Wilhelm Trautmann, Feldwebel, 2nd Battalion, 18th Panzer Division, participated as a tank commander at Yelnya. After recovering from wounds sustained during the retreat, he returned to Leipzig in 1945 and resumed work as a machinist. He later devoted 3 decades to regional veterans organizations, helping maintain the Bundesarchiv Tank Crew Oral Histories collection. In a 1983 interview with the Saxon Military Archives, Trautmann said, "The march forced us to rethink what was possible. It was not heroics, but adaptation that let us survive a minute longer." Trautmann stayed in regular contact with over 20 division comrades, and his 1964 memoir remains preserved at the Bundesarchiv. He died in 1991 at age 76 in Leipzig. The Smolensk-Yelnya Marsh Memorial, located east of the old Yelnya Road, was dedicated on August 25, 1996. Designed by architect Irina Pavlova, its granite slabs evoke the geometry of tank tracks sunk in peat, directly commemorating both Soviet and German tank crews immobilized by terrain. Annual remembrance ceremonies on July 10 attract some 3,000 attendees, with the 2016 75th anniversary event attended by surviving veterans, local school groups, and military historians. The Russian General Staff Academy uses the Yelnya battle in its operational mobility syllabus, examining how engineering failure and terrain interact. In 1974, the Soviet Army amended armored vehicle recovery doctrine by mandating field evaluation of subsoil and groundwater presence for all mechanized units. Archives at TS Ammo RF in Podolsk hold 415 technical reports, and 77 oral testimonies from survivors and witnesses to the battle. The technical lessons of July 1941